Hi everyone, I'm Sloane, as you probably know by now. I'm partnering with Allison and Jeremy in this project. And like has been stated before, this was stemmed from the Reparations Committee Task Force, and it's kind of branched a little bit away from that now, but it's still related to the Detroit region. So as some of you may know, some of you may not know, the Detroit region is in Southeast Michigan, excuse me. It covers around 143 square miles and has a population of around 670,000 people, which is the largest city in Michigan. Because of this, it's a major industrial and transportation hub, and it faces a lot of air quality concerns because of this, particularly with the River Rouge region, which has a lot of industries in that area currently, and also I-75 and 94 running directly through this city and major neighborhoods in the area. The current situation is there's a lot of environmental justice concerns that are being raised because there's a lot of lower income and minority individuals in Detroit. To the right, you'll see a Michigan environmental justice screening, which is essentially a score that is taken for the region. And the higher the score, meaning the higher they are of a concern for environmental reasonings. So that takes into account things such as age, race and ethnicity, income, etc. And we'll notice that majority of the Detroit region is in the red, meaning that they are highly disproportionate to poor air quality and other environmental concerns. So air quality has a lot of health implications, including like cardiovascular issues, neurological issues, children's health and respiratory. For the Detroit region, children's health and respiratory issues have been a major concern as of recently. 16% of adults in Detroit do have asthma, and the majority of ER visits by children are because of asthma-related issues. So it's a huge concern, and it's also a huge concern for schools in the region, with a lot of schools having to close down because of air quality issues. So obviously, I think this is very important to look at, particularly because, as we saw on that map, there's a lot of industries and heavy transportation facilities that are going through directly through these neighborhoods and through these schools in Detroit. Now, I focused on two different air quality subject matters. There's first the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which is basically the 6 major air pollutants which are harmful to public health. Overall, this is set by the EPA, so it's a national standard that includes ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, NOx, sulfur dioxide, and lead. And then I also dove a little bit into the hazardous air pollutants, which is not as widely talked about in the Detroit region. People mostly look at the standard air pollutants, but there's 187 air toxins that could be in the air. These all can cause cancer, reproductive problems, and birth defects. Some examples include benzene, asbestos, mercury, etc. But for my project, I was going to look at both of these and trying to scope down and really determine what I wanted to look at was kind of this first semester for me. So I focused on specifically sulfur dioxide and ozone as the main criteria pollutants because as of recently, we've been in non-attainment for SO2, which essentially means we're not meeting those national standards as we should be in the Detroit region, which our national standard is 75 ppb on a 1 hour average. And for ozone, we're currently in maintenance, which means historically in the past, we were in non-attainment for ozone. We are exceeding that limit of 0.07 ppm. But now that we're in maintenance, that means Detroit successfully made a plan to fix our ozone issue, but that doesn't mean we've necessarily gotten there yet. That just means they made a plan and they're not implementing that plan. So we're in maintenance. And so particularly looking at these criteria pollutants first, I obviously used the air data from EPA and the National Emissions Inventory point sources. I used Python to analyze and visualize some of the air quality data for SO2 and ozone. So first, I want to take a look at the location of the air sensors I found in Detroit, Michigan. These are all sourced from the EPA, and I have colored them differently and provided different symbols for people with color blindness for the Detroit region. You'll notice that I have highlighted 4 in orange in particular. Those are the ones directly around the Marathon plant, which has been a major concern for people in the Detroit area. The Marathon plant is directly in between these two major neighborhoods in Detroit. So it's a huge issue for people. So that is why I have selected to look at these different sensors. Not only did I select these, but these were basically the only ones in the Detroit area that the EPA provided. So that's another issue. They should probably make more sensors. But looking closer into the River Rouge region, we have these point sources in the area that I provide along with the Marathon sensors. Here's the Marathon plant directly in the middle of these quadrant of sensors. We also have things such as a cement facility, a terminal which makes petroleum, a Coke battery plant, which just constantly emits things into the river, DTE energy power plant, and other things such as asphalt, etc. But this is like the main hub that is well known, widely portrayed in the news for having such huge air quality problems. You may have also heard of Zug Island. That's been a huge thing. If you fly over this region in a plane, Zug Island is black compared to the land around it, solely because of the air pollutants it's shooting out. So I went ahead and I made some SO2 graphs for the region. I labeled them by site ID, and the red line is our attainment value. I specifically did this from 2018 to 2023, which you may think that's only 5 years, Sloane. Well, the last time they did an analysis on this region was in 2017, and that was done by the University of Michigan. So I figured I would just, for the beginning of my semester, just look at the last recent 5 years where they haven't taken a look at it yet. You'll notice that this site, number 15, I'll show you that again in a second, but that has pretty generally high SO2 values. They did reach a non-attainment region about 2018, but overall it sort of looks like, if you squint, that the SO2 is decreasing over time, which we would like to see that, because that means they're putting in more filters into the industries. But I think it's important to note that overall the city is going down, but still has some SO2 to get rid of. And a few sites, like also like number 6, particularly there was 2 measurements that reached over 800 that I did not plot on this graph, but I didn't plot it because the scale was way too large if I did, but just note that 2 time periods in around 2020, 2021 had values that exceeded 100 into the 800 region. And that is particularly because I found that the sensors were down during that period, so they were not reporting correctly. So remember site number 15, this is right next to the waterfront petroleum, which is emitting a ton of SO2 because they're burning gases. And also the ones right next to the Marathon plant were also sort of decreasing in time and not necessarily in non-attainment, but still important to note that they did have relatively high SO2 values overall. And then I also took a look at ozone. We'll see that they have a nice seasonal fluctuation. You can see that they generally have a higher peak around the summertime in this area, which is normal to see, nothing too crazy there. But the non-attainment line of 0.07, it does exceed it quite a few times over the summer. Still, though, we're in maintenance, not a huge issue, they say, says the EPA. But I think it's important to note that particularly like in 2024, we did see higher ozone concentrations because of those wildfires that we saw this past summer. And it's important to note also that we were technically in non-attainment for ozone for that summer, but the city of Detroit put in a request to not count that summer towards the non-attainment years because of the wildfires. Hugely arguable if we should have even done that, or if we were in non-attainment regardless of the wildfires. But in future years, I think it'd be important to look at if we get a peak sort of like that again coming this summer, and we can see if that really was because of the wildfires. And these are the 2 ozone sensors. In the entire Detroit region, we only have 2 ozone sensors. That's because they shut down They shut down 6 of them after we were considered in maintenance and no longer in non-attainment. But I think looking forward into this project, I definitely would like to get a longer time series on those ozone sensors and probably look at the ones they did shut down and maybe see if there's something else out there in the regions that they already stopped providing sensor data in. Now going back to the hazardous air pollutants that I was looking at, remember there's 187 of them. So I'm going to show you one of the 187 air toxins. Benzene being one of them. Benzene is a air toxin made from mostly crude oil and burning gases. And the exceedance level for benzene is 9. We don't quite reach 9, but we do get to around 3 micrograms per meters cubed, which is quite high in this region. It's the highest I've seen around the Marathon plants, which is where I collected these sensors from. And regardless of that, 9 is quite an arbitrary value. You don't want to see any benzene in your neighborhood, regardless of it, if it reaches 9 or not. So overall, this is from 2012 to 2020. They stopped collecting benzene data in this area after 2020. But I'm looking for future iterations of this to find more recent data on the air toxins. But this was decreasing over time overall, which is a great thing to see. But as you can see, there was one instance near the Marathon plant where we reached a higher level of benzene yet again. I think it's also good to note that there was a government-wide initiative to do a Detroit air toxin analysis on the region. The last time they did that was in 2015. So I think we should renew this new project in the future. As I said, those air toxin sensors came directly from this Marathon region. For future work, I would love to look at different areas, but I think it's important to note that the air toxin sensors are usually the same as the ones that are collecting standard pollutant measurements, although there are less of them overall. So I also took a look at air permit violations in the Detroit region. Let's focus just on Detroit, nothing outside of the Detroit area. But essentially, the larger the red circle, that means the more EPA violations a point source has had. Now, what is a violation? A violation is they didn't install a sensor properly. They failed to report what their sensors were saying to the government, or they're emitting directly into a neighborhood. Also, this includes both standard and air toxin violations. And air toxin violations could be their odors are exceeding the roof. So that means you're in a neighborhood right next to the Marathon plant, you're smelling gas 24/7, 7 days a week. That's also an EPA violation. Now, the largest ones in the Detroit area are the Marathon plant, a iron and foundry steel plant, and also a petroleum making facility. These are all near huge neighborhoods. There's actually a elementary school right in between those two areas. So I think for future work, I would love to find out more about the area, more about what's spatially happening, because I think if you overlay it with something like this, that would be great for applicable science work in this area. And then I also noted that the River Rouge complex region, which is right here, yet again, has violated permits over 10 times in the past 6 years. So that's crazy to see. The last violation was actually 3 days ago by the Marathon plant. Some future directions, like I said, I'd love to do some satellite imagery on the area because right now I'm doing more of a temporal analysis of the region, but I think using that satellite imagery will help me really cover the scope of the area, especially since there's such limited sensors, as I showed you before. I would love to look at seasonal and annual fluctuations. Maybe there's more fluctuations there than there are, particularly what the point sources are emitting. It'd be great to see what's going on. Also, I'd love to do some more data visualizations, especially since there are 187 air toxins. Doing all of those would be greatly important to the community. And as well, I would like to create something that's applicable and usable to the general audience. This is a more scientific approach in my first semester, but being able to visually produce something to people that live in those communities and neighborhoods will be greatly important to everyone living there. Thank you.